She knew they'd take them away if anyone found out. Madison's hands trembled as she guided the twins through the steps. 1, 2, 3, their purple tutus spinning in perfect rhythm. The music swelled. Sophie's eyes were bright, actually bright, for the first time in 3 years. Then the front door opened. Noah Thompson stood frozen in the doorway, his briefcase hanging from his hand, his face white as death. "What the hell are you doing with my daughters?" His voice cracked on the last word. And Madison realized in that moment, everything she'd worked for, everything she'd hidden, was about to come crashing down. Noah Thompson didn't plan to come home early that November afternoon. He never came home early. Not anymore. Not since Emily died. But his board meeting at the tech company downtown wrapped up faster than expected, and before he could think of another excuse to stay away, he found himself driving through Georgetown, past the row houses with their black shutters and American flags, toward the mansion he'd been avoiding for 3 years. The house sat on a quiet street near Dumbarton Oaks, one of those old Washington, D.C. estates that looked like it belonged in a movie about old money and dark secrets. Noah had bought it when Sophie and Isabella were born, back when he still believed money could fix anything. He pulled into the circular driveway and sat there for a moment, engine idling, staring at the front door like it might swallow him whole. The house had been silent for 3 years. Ever since the accident on the Capitol Beltway. Ever since the state trooper knocked on his office door and said the words that split his life into before and after. "Mr. Thompson, there's been an accident." Emily had been driving home from the girls' therapy appointment. A semi-truck ran a red light at the interchange near Tyson's Corner. She died on impact. Sophie and Isabella had been making progress before that. Small progress, but progress. A few words. Brief eye contact. Tiny smiles that felt like miracles. After Emily died, they disappeared completely. Stopped speaking. Stopped looking at anyone. Wouldn't let him touch them. It was like they'd gone somewhere he couldn't follow, and every door he tried to open just led to more silence. Noah had spent over $3 million trying to reach them. 15 specialists over 3 years. Behavioral therapy. Speech therapy. ABA programs that cost more than most people's houses. Nothing worked. 6 weeks ago, he hired Madison Lewis to manage the house. 29 years old, quiet, efficient. She cleaned, cooked, kept things running while he buried himself in work and tried to forget he had a home at all. He barely noticed her. Now, sitting in his car, Noah took a breath and opened the door. The November air was cold, sharp. Leaves scattered across the driveway in shades of red and gold. He walked to the front door, key in hand. That's when he heard it. Music. Classical music, soft and clear, floating through the walls. Tchaikovsky. Swan Lake. Emily's favorite. Noah's chest tightened. His hand froze on the doorknob. The house had been silent for 3 years. No music. No television. No sound except the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of his own footsteps on marble floors. So where was that music coming from? His heart started pounding as he pushed open the door and stepped into the foyer. The music grew louder, coming from somewhere deep in the house. The living room, maybe. Or the sunroom. Then he heard something else. Something that made his knees weak. Laughter. High-pitched, bright, real. His daughters. Noah hadn't heard them laugh since the morning Emily made the Mickey Mouse pancakes, 3 hours before she got in the car for the last time. He moved toward the sound like a man in a dream, his briefcase still hanging from his hand, his breath coming short and fast. The music swelled. The laughter continued. And underneath it all, a woman's voice, soft and rhythmic, counting. 1, 2, 3. That's it. 1, 2, 3. Noah reached the living room doors, tall white double doors that Emily had insisted on when they renovated, and pushed them open. What he saw stopped his heart. Madison stood in the center of the Persian rug, arms raised above her head like a ballerina, moving with impossible grace. She wore her usual clothes, jeans, a simple gray sweater, but the way she moved made her look like she was floating. And on either side of her, wearing matching purple tutus, were Sophie and Isabella. Dancing. Not just moving. Dancing. Their small arms were raised, mirroring Madison's movements. Their faces were bright, alive, their eyes focused on Madison like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. They moved in perfect sync, their steps careful and deliberate, following Madison's rhythm like they'd been doing this their whole lives. Noah's briefcase hit the marble floor with a crack that echoed through the room. 3 heads turned. Sophie looked directly at him. Not past him. Not through him. At him. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, the longest eye contact she'd made since Emily's funeral, and then she did something that shattered what was left of Noah's heart. She reached one small hand toward him. Noah's knees buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe, his vision blurring with tears. The music kept playing. Madison stood frozen, her arms still raised, her face pale. Isabella turned back to Madison, waiting, as if this interruption was just part of the dance. Noah tried to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, staring at his daughters who hadn't responded to anything in 3 years, moving with grace and joy and life. For the first time since Emily died, when Noah reached toward them, they didn't pull away. They didn't scream. They didn't retreat into the silent place where he couldn't follow. They just stood there, holding the moment, while Madison watched him with tears streaming down her face. If you've ever felt like you failed someone you love, if you've ever stood in a doorway and watched a miracle you didn't think you deserved, then you know what Noah felt in that moment. You know what it's like to realize you've been looking right past the answer the whole time. If this story is already hitting somewhere deep, if you can feel it in your chest, don't scroll past it. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For every parent who's still fighting. For every person who needs to believe that second chances are real. Because what happens next, what Noah's about to discover about Madison, will change everything you thought you knew about grief, healing, and the people God puts in our path exactly when we need them most. Noah didn't say anything about what he saw. He just stood there for a long moment, watching Madison lower her arms slowly, watching his daughters mirror her movements like they were all connected by invisible strings. Then he turned and walked away. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Noah couldn't stop seeing it. Sophie's eyes on his. Isabella's hands moving in perfect rhythm. The joy on their faces, actual joy, something he thought had died with Emily. The next day, he left the office at 3 instead of 6. The day after that, he left at 2. By the end of the week, he was leaving at noon, making excuses his assistant stopped questioning. Family emergency, he'd say. She'd just nod. He'd drive home through the DC traffic, past the monuments and the tourists and the food trucks on Constitution Avenue, and slip into his house like a thief. Then he'd watch. He'd stand in doorways, hide in the kitchen, position himself at the top of the stairs where the old wood didn't creak. Always careful. Always hidden. Because he needed to understand what was happening, and some part of him was terrified that if Madison knew he was watching, she'd stop. What he saw broke him in ways he didn't know were possible. Madison wasn't doing therapy. She wasn't following some program or technique. She was just living with them, moving through the house with a rhythm that seemed to pull Sophie and Isabella out of their silence without them even realizing it. She'd hum while folding laundry, her body swaying gently, and Isabella, who hadn't responded to anything in 3 years, would stop rocking and just watch her. Actually watch her, her eyes tracking Madison's movements like she was trying to memorize them. When Madison set the table for lunch, she'd place each item down with intention. Plate. Fork. Cup. Napkin. And across the room, Noah would watch Sophie move her hands in the same pattern, like she was learning a language without words. Everything Madison did had a pulse to it. A gentleness Noah had forgotten could exist. One afternoon, he watched her dress the girls for a walk. For 3 years, getting them dressed had been a nightmare. Meltdowns, screaming, Sophie hitting herself when the fabric felt wrong against her skin. But Madison held up Sophie's jacket and swayed it softly, humming something low and rhythmic. Sophie reached for it. Not because she was told to. Because the movement invited her. Madison guided Sophie's arms through the sleeves in time with her humming. Slow. Steady. Like water finding its way downhill. No tears. No fight. Just peace. Noah's chest tightened so hard he thought his ribs might crack. Emily used to move like that. Used to sway the girls to sleep, bounce them on her hip while she made coffee, hum songs without words while she folded their tiny clothes. She'd understood something Noah never had, that his daughters didn't need fixing. They needed to be met where they were. And Madison was doing exactly that. Then one Thursday afternoon, something happened that made Noah forget how to breathe. Madison stood in the living room and raised her arms slowly, palms up, like she was lifting something invisible. She held the position for a moment, then lowered her arms. Then raised them again. Once. Twice. A third time. And Isabella, who hadn't imitated anyone since she was 2 years old, lifted her arms too. Slowly. Deliberately. Mirroring Madison's movements like she'd been waiting 3 years for someone to show her how. Noah's hand froze on his laptop. His throat burned. His vision blurred. He wanted to shout, to cry, to run into that room and thank Madison for giving him back something he thought was gone forever. But he didn't move. He just sat there, watching this woman unlock his daughters with nothing but presence and rhythm. And that's when the question slammed into him like a freight train. How did she know? How did a maid, someone with no credentials, no degrees, no training that he knew of, understand his daughters better than 15 specialists who'd spent years studying autism? Better than him? Noah stared at Madison as she guided the girls into another slow, graceful movement. There was something in the way she moved. Something trained. Something professional. Something she wasn't telling him. And he needed to know what it was. Because the woman he'd hired to clean his floors had just done what $3 million couldn't. She'd brought his daughters back to life. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never see coming. The ones we overlook. The ones we walk right past because we're too busy looking for someone who looks like what we think we need. If that hits different for you, if you've ever been that person or needed that person, don't scroll past this. Subscribe. Because what Noah's about to learn about Madison will gut you in the best way possible. And some stories are too important to miss. This is one of them. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Noah made a decision. He found Madison in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, her movements as rhythmic as everything else she did. Madison. His voice came out rougher than he intended. She turned, her eyes widening slightly. In 3 years of employing various staff, Noah had never asked anyone to stay after hours. Never had a real conversation beyond scheduling and paychecks and please make sure the girls eat something. Can you stay a moment? Please. She set down the cloth. Of course, Mr. Thompson. He gestured to the small table by the window, the one Emily used to sit at with her coffee while she watched the sun come up over the garden. They sat across from each other, and for a long moment, Noah didn't know how to start. How do you ask someone to explain a miracle? Where did you learn it? He finally said. Madison's face went very still. What you do with them. The way you move. The way you reach them. She looked down at her hands, her fingers laced together on the table. I don't mean to overstep by asking, Noah continued quickly. I need to understand. 15 specialists over 3 years couldn't do what you've done in 6 weeks. The silence stretched between them like something physical. Mr. Thompson. Noah. Please. She looked up at him then, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Pain. Deep, old pain that mirrored his own. I wasn't always a maid, she said quietly. The words hung in the air. Noah leaned forward, his heart pounding. I worked as a dance and movement therapist for 8 years, Madison continued. Children with special needs. Mostly kids on the autism spectrum. I specialized in nonverbal communication through rhythm and movement. She paused, her jaw tightening. I was good at it. Really good. Until I wasn't. What happened? The question came out barely above a whisper. Burnout. The word came out like a confession. I took every failure personally. Every child I couldn't reach felt like I'd failed them, like I hadn't tried hard enough or been patient enough or smart enough. Her voice cracked. After 8 years, I just broke. I couldn't do it anymore. I walked away 2 years ago. Took domestic jobs to pay rent, to step away from the weight of it all. Noah felt like someone had punched him in the chest. You're a trained therapist. Was, she corrected softly. I gave up my license. I'm not practicing anymore. What I'm doing with Sophie and Isabella isn't therapy. It's just being present. But you saw it, Noah said. From the first day. You knew what they needed. Madison nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I saw it immediately. The way they moved. The way they retreated into themselves. I knew traditional verbal approaches would keep failing them. But I was terrified to say anything. Why? Who would believe the maid? The words hit Noah like a slap. He thought about all the specialists he'd hired. The doctors with degrees from Johns Hopkins and Harvard. The therapists who charged $500 an hour and spoke in clinical terms that made Sophie and Isabella sound like problems to be solved instead of children to be loved. And the whole time, the answer had been right in front of him, wearing jeans and folding laundry. "I've been paying you $15 an hour to clean floors," Noah said, his voice tight, "while you've been doing what I paid specialists 6 figures to fail at." "Mr. Thompson." "Noah." His voice cracked. "You gave me back my daughters, Madison. You did it thinking you had to hide who you really are because I was too blind to see you." A tear slid down Madison's cheek. Noah's hands clenched on the table, not from anger at her, but from rage at himself. At his blindness. At the 3 years he'd wasted looking for answers in all the wrong places. "Teach me," he said suddenly. Madison blinked. "What?" "Teach me how to reach them. How to be present with them the way you are." She studied him, her expression uncertain. "It's not about technique, Noah. It's about showing up. Being patient. Meeting them in their world instead of dragging them into ours." "Then teach me that," he said. "Because I've been absent for 3 years. And I'm ready to come home." Madison looked at him for a long moment. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the grief he'd been carrying like stones in his pockets, the weight of 3 years of failure pressing down on his shoulders. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect herself from falling back into the work that had broken her. But another part of her, the part that had come alive the moment she saw Sophie and Isabella, knew she couldn't walk away. "Okay," she finally whispered. Noah's shoulders sagged with relief. But there was something else in Madison's expression. Something uncertain. Like she was opening a door she'd spent 2 years keeping locked. And Noah had no idea that inviting her deeper into their lives meant Madison would eventually have to face the very thing that broke her in the first place. Over the next few days, Madison started teaching Noah. Not in any formal way. Just small things. Ways to be present that didn't require words. "When you give Sophie her juice," Madison said one morning, "don't just hand it to her. Move with intention. Slow down. Let her see the glass, watch you pour, hear the liquid hit the cup. Make it a rhythm she can follow." Noah tried. His movements felt stiff, awkward. He'd spent 3 years armored in grief and distance, and now he was trying to soften, to open, to be present in ways that felt terrifying. But slowly, something shifted. One morning, he was spreading peanut butter on toast, moving his hand in the same rhythmic circle Madison had taught him. Around and around, slow and steady. Sophie appeared at his elbow. She didn't say anything, she never did, but she placed her small hand on his wrist. And moved with him. Together, they spread peanut butter in slow, synchronized circles. Noah's eyes burned with tears, but he didn't stop. He just kept moving, kept breathing, kept being present with his daughter in this small, sacred moment. "Good," Madison said softly from the doorway. "That's it. That's exactly it." But even as Noah started to connect with his daughters, Madison was struggling. Late at night, after everyone was asleep, she'd sit in the small room off the kitchen where Noah had set up a bed for her, and she'd let herself remember. The boy's name was Daniel. 7 years old. Autism, severe. She'd worked with him for 6 months at a center in Alexandria, just across the river. He'd made progress. Small, beautiful progress. He'd started imitating her movements, making eye contact, even attempting a few words. Then one day, he had a meltdown at school. His aide lost track of him for just a moment. He ran. Out the door. Into the street. Into traffic. The car couldn't stop in time. It wasn't Madison's fault. Everyone said so. The school administrators. The other therapists. Even Daniel's parents, who were too destroyed by grief to blame anyone but themselves. But Madison never believed them. She'd replayed that day 1,000 times. What if she'd been there? What if she'd taught him better coping strategies? What if she'd done something different, been smarter, tried harder? The guilt ate her alive until she couldn't work anymore. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't look at another child without seeing Daniel's face. So she walked away. Now, sitting in the dark, Madison looked toward the stairs where Sophie and Isabella were sleeping, and she felt that old fear rising like water in her lungs. What if she failed them too? What if her presence, her methods, weren't enough? What if something happened and it was her fault? She pressed her hands to her face and tried to breathe. Upstairs, Noah lay awake too, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 3 years, he'd tucked his daughters into bed. They'd let him pull the covers up to their chins, let him kiss their foreheads. Isabella had even reached for his hand and held it for 3 full seconds before turning away. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Noah thought about Emily. About how much she would have loved seeing this. How she would have known exactly what to say to Madison, exactly how to help her carry the weight of whatever pain she was hiding. He didn't have Emily's gift for that. But he could try. The next morning, he found Madison in the kitchen making breakfast, her movements slower than usual, her eyes tired. "Madison," he said, "are you okay?" She looked up, surprise flashing across her face. "I'm fine." "You're not." She started to argue, then stopped. Sighed. "I'm just scared," she admitted quietly. "Scared that I'm going to fail them. That something's going to happen and it'll be my fault." Noah moved closer. "What happened before?" Madison's hands stilled on the cutting board. And then quietly, she told him about Daniel. When she finished, her face was wet with tears. Noah didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said something Madison wasn't expecting. "You loved him." She blinked. "What?" "Daniel. You loved him. That's why it hurt so much. That's why you walked away." Madison nodded, unable to speak. "That's the kind of person my daughters need," Noah said. "Someone who loves them enough to be scared. Someone who shows up anyway." He reached across the counter and took her hand. "You're not going to fail them, Madison. But even if something goes wrong, even if we mess up, because we'll face it together. Okay?" Madison looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger 6 weeks ago, who was now trusting her with the most precious thing in his life. "Okay," she whispered. But neither of them knew that the real test was still coming. A week later, Noah did something he'd been avoiding for 3 years. He gave Madison the key to Emily's office. "Just do what you need to do," he said, his voice barely steady. "I can't go in there yet. But you can." Madison took the key, feeling its weight in her palm. The office was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the hallway. Noah had kept it locked since the funeral, unable to face the space where Emily had spent so many hours working on grants for arts programs in D.C. public schools, writing in her journal, dancing alone when she needed to think. Madison opened the door slowly. The room was exactly as Emily had left it. Books on the shelves. Ballet slippers hanging from a hook. Photos of her dancing, before the diagnosis, before the fear, before everything got harder. Madison worked carefully, treating everything like it was sacred. She dusted the desk. Organized the books. Folded the blanket on the reading chair. Then she opened the closet. Behind Emily's wedding dress, cream silk that still smelled faintly of her perfume, Madison found a box. Unmarked. Dusty. Heavy. She pulled it out and set it on the desk. Inside were dozens of USB drives, each one labeled in Emily's neat handwriting. Sophie and Isabella, 18 weeks pregnant. First dance, 6 months old. Learning to move, 2 years. Madison's hands shook as she picked through them. There were so many. Emily had been recording for years. The last one was dated 3 days before the accident. "For whoever comes after me." Madison stared at that label for a long time. Then she carried the box downstairs. Noah was in the kitchen, staring at his coffee like it held answers. When Madison set the box in front of him, his face went white. "I found these in her office," Madison said quietly. "I think you need to see them." Noah stared at his wife's handwriting. His hands trembled as he reached for one of the drives. "Will you stay?" he whispered. "I can't do this alone." Madison sat beside him. Noah plugged the first drive into his laptop. The screen flickered. Then Emily appeared, pregnant, glowing, sitting in her office. "My sweet girls," she said to the camera. "If you're watching this, it means Mama isn't there to tell you herself." Noah made a sound like something breaking. "I know words are hard for you," Emily continued. "So I'm recording these, my voice, my movements, my songs. So someday, even if I can't be there, you'll still have me. The video showed Emily singing lullabies, swaying gently, moving with the same grace Madison had been using with the girls. Noah opened video after video, watching his wife teach their daughters in the only language they could understand. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known they would need this. Madison wiped tears from her face as she watched. Emily had been preparing for a future she'd never see, leaving breadcrumbs for someone to follow. For Noah. For Madison. For whoever would care enough to look. Then Noah opened the last file. The one labeled, "For whoever comes after me." Emily appeared on screen, but she looked different. Tired. Scared. Like she was carrying something heavy. "If you're watching this," Emily said, "it means you're the one helping my girls." Noah leaned closer to the screen, his breath catching. "And I need to tell you something. If you've ever lost someone who left pieces of themselves behind, pieces you didn't find until it was almost too late, you know this feeling. You know what it's like to discover love in the places you weren't looking." Noah was about to hear something that would change everything. Something Emily had hidden until the very end. And if you're still here, if this story is reaching somewhere deep inside you that needs to hear it, subscribe. Because some truths are too important to miss. And what Emily's about to say will break your heart and put it back together all at once. Emily's face filled the screen, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "Noah, if something happens to me, don't let the girls stop moving. Movement is their language. It's how they understand the world, how they express what words can't." She paused, her hand resting on her stomach like she was protecting something precious. "I know you, Noah. I know you'll try to fix this. You'll throw money at it, hire the best people, search for solutions like it's a problem that just needs the right equation." Her voice cracked. But what Sophie and Isabella need isn't a solution. They need presence. They need rhythm. They need someone who can meet them where they are and dance with them there. Noah's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the laptop steady. "Find that person, Noah. Find them and don't let them go. Because our girls deserve to keep moving through this life, even if I can't move with them anymore." Emily wiped her eyes, and for a moment, she looked directly into the camera like she could see him. Like she knew he'd be sitting here 3 years later, broken and desperate and finally ready to hear what she'd been trying to tell him. "And whoever you are, the one who's helping them, thank you. Thank you for seeing what I saw. For loving them the way they need to be loved." She smiled through her tears. "Don't let grief freeze them. Don't let fear stop you. Just keep moving. Keep dancing. Keep being present. That's all they need. That's all any of us need." The video ended. Noah stared at the blank screen. Then he broke. Completely. He dropped his head into his hands and sobbed, raw, unguarded sobs from a place he'd kept buried for 3 years. All the grief he'd locked away came pouring out, and he couldn't stop it, didn't want to stop it. Madison said nothing. She just placed her hand gently on his shoulder and let him shatter. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time felt meaningless. When Noah finally looked up, his face was wet, his eyes red and swollen. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew I'd need help. And I locked it all away." "You were grieving," Madison said softly. "You did what you could." Noah shook his head. "She left me a roadmap. And God sent you to help me follow it." He looked at Madison, really looked at her, and saw the tears streaming down her face. "Will you help me use these videos with the girls?" he asked. "Will you help me be the father Emily believed I could be?" Madison's chest tightened. She thought about Daniel, about the guilt she'd been carrying for 2 years, about the fear that had been following her like a shadow. But she also thought about Sophie and Isabella. About their bright eyes and their purple tutus. About the way they'd started to come alive again. About Emily's words, "Don't let fear stop you." "Yes," Madison whispered. "I'll help you." Noah reached across the table and took her hand. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something besides grief. He felt hope. But neither of them knew that Emily's videos held one more secret. Something she'd hidden in her final recording. Something that would force both of them to confront the truth about what really happened before the accident. And when they discovered it, everything would change. Over the next 2 weeks, Noah and Madison worked together, using Emily's videos as a guide. They started small, playing the videos for Sophie and Isabella during quiet moments, watching as the girls' eyes lit up at the sound of their mother's voice. At first, the girls would just stare at the screen, motionless. But slowly, something shifted. Isabella started rocking in time with Emily's movements. Sophie's hands would flutter when Emily sang. Madison showed Noah how to build on those small responses. How to move with Emily's rhythm. How to create patterns the girls could follow. Making breakfast became a dance. Getting dressed became a song. Everything had a pulse, a pattern the girls could anticipate. Noah fumbled at first. His movements were stiff, uncertain. He'd spent 3 years armored in grief, and now he was trying to soften in ways that felt impossible. But one morning, something clicked. He was pouring orange juice, moving his hand in the same slow arc Madison had taught him. Up, pour down. Up, pour down. Sophie appeared beside him. She picked up her empty glass and moved it in the same pattern. Up, hold down. Up, hold down. They stood there together, father and daughter, moving in sync without words. Noah's throat tightened, but he didn't stop. He just kept breathing, kept moving, kept being present. When Sophie looked up at him and smiled, actually smiled, Noah thought his heart might burst. "You're doing it," Madison said from the doorway, her voice soft. "You're really doing it." But even as Noah connected with his daughters, Madison was fighting her own battle. She'd started having nightmares again. About Daniel. About the moment she got the call. About standing in that hospital corridor while his parents screamed their grief into the sterile air. One night, Noah found her sitting on the back porch at 2 a.m, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. He sat beside her without asking. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong," Madison said quietly. "What if they have a meltdown in public? What if something happens and I'm not there? What if?" Madison. Noah's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't control everything. Neither can I. All we can do is show up." But what if showing up isn't enough? Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Emily used to tell me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Even when we're scared. Especially when we're scared." Madison looked at him, tears in her eyes. "She would have liked you," Noah said. "She would have trusted you with our girls." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because she left that video for you. She knew someone would come. And she was right." Madison wiped her face. "What if I fail them?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Noah said simply. "That's what family does." The word hung in the air between them. Family. Madison hadn't felt like part of a family in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. "Okay," she whispered. They sat there together in the dark, watching the lights of DC glow against the November sky, neither of them knowing that the next day would bring a discovery that would test everything they'd built. The next afternoon, while Noah was at a meeting downtown, Madison was organizing Emily's videos chronologically, trying to create a system they could follow. She was putting the last drive back in the box when she noticed something odd. The box had a false bottom. Her heart started pounding as she carefully pried it up. Underneath was one more USB drive, wrapped in tissue paper. The label read, "The Truth About Before." Madison's hands shook as she plugged it in. Emily appeared on screen, but she looked different from the other videos. Worn down. Scared. Like she'd been crying for hours. "If you're watching this," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it means you're the one who found it. The one Noah brought into our lives. The one helping my girls." She took a shaky breath. "And I need you to know something I never told anyone. Not Noah. Not the therapists. Not even my parents." Madison leaned closer to the screen. 2 weeks before the accident, something happened. We were at the grocery store, me and the girls. Isabella had a meltdown. A bad one. She was screaming, hitting herself, and Emily's voice broke. I snapped. I was so tired, so scared, so frustrated that I'd never reach them. I yelled at her. Told her I couldn't do this anymore. Said things I didn't mean. Tears streamed down Emily's face. And Isabella looked at me with these terrified eyes. Then she just shut down. Stopped looking at me. Stopped responding. And Sophie followed her lead. Emily pressed her hands to her face. That's when they really went silent. Not after the accident. Before. Because of me. Because I broke something in them that I didn't know how to fix. Madison felt like she couldn't breathe. I spent those last 2 weeks trying everything to reach them again, Emily continued. Nothing worked. And the day of the accident, I was driving home from another failed therapy appointment, and I was crying so hard I could barely see the road. She looked directly into the camera. So if you're the one helping them now, I need you to know, it's okay to be human. It's okay to mess up, to feel overwhelmed, to be afraid you're not enough. Emily's voice grew fierce. What matters is that you keep showing up. That you keep trying. That you forgive yourself and keep moving forward. She leaned closer to the camera. Don't carry the weight of perfection. Just carry the weight of love. That's all they need. That's all I needed. That's all any of us need. She wiped her eyes. And whoever you are, thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to try when I couldn't anymore. Thank you for giving my girls what I failed to give them at the end. The video ended. Madison sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Emily had been scared too. Emily had failed too. Emily had yelled at her daughters and broken something and spent her last days trying to fix it. And she'd forgiven herself enough to keep trying. Madison thought about Daniel. About the guilt she'd been carrying like stones in her pockets. About the fear that had been paralyzing her for 2 years. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was just about being present. About showing up even when you were scared. About loving people enough to risk failing them. Madison heard the front door open. Noah was home. She wiped her face and went downstairs. He took one look at her and knew something had happened. I found another video, Madison said quietly. They sat at the kitchen table, and Madison played it for him. When it ended, Noah sat in silence for a long time. I didn't know, he finally said. She never told me. She was protecting you, Madison said. And protecting herself. She was human, Noah. Just like us. Noah looked at her. Does it change anything? Knowing this. Madison thought about it. Then shook her head. It makes me love her more, she said. Because she kept trying anyway. Noah reached across the table and took Madison's hand. Will you keep trying too? He asked quietly. Madison looked toward the living room, where Sophie and Isabella were playing with their tutus, spinning slowly in the afternoon light. Yes, she said. I will. But what neither of them knew was that the hardest test was still ahead. And it would come from the place they least expected. 3 days later, Noah made a decision. He called Madison into the living room, where Sophie and Isabella were watching one of Emily's videos, their small hands moving in time with their mother's movements on the screen. I want to do something, Noah said. I want to set up a foundation in Emily's name. For families like ours. For therapists like you who burn out because they care too much. Madison's eyes widened. Noah. I want to create a place where movement and rhythm and presence are the foundation, not an afterthought. Where kids like Sophie and Isabella can be met where they are instead of being forced into boxes that don't fit. His voice grew stronger. And I want you to run it. Not as my employee. As my partner. Someone who understands what these families need because you've lived it. Madison's chest tightened. This was everything she'd walked away from. Everything she'd been afraid to touch again. What if I fail again? She whispered. Noah moved closer. Then we'll fail together. And we'll get back up and try again. That's what Emily was trying to tell us. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. He took both her hands in his. You've given me back my daughters, Madison. You've taught me how to be their father. Let me help you do this for other families. Let me help you turn your pain into something that heals. Madison looked at Sophie and Isabella. They'd stopped watching the video and were now watching her and Noah, their eyes bright and curious. They weren't fixed. They weren't cured. They were just themselves, moving through the world in their own rhythm, in their own time. And that was enough. Okay, Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's do it. Noah pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he could breathe again. Like the weight he'd been carrying had finally lifted. Not because everything was perfect, but because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. If you've made it this far, if this story has touched something in you that needed to be touched, don't let it end here. Subscribe. Share this. Let it reach someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to come home. That healing doesn't require perfection. Just presence. Just love. Just showing up, even when it's hard. Because this story isn't just about Noah and Madison and two little girls in purple tutus. It's about every person who's ever felt like they failed someone they love. Every person who's ever wondered if they could try again. And the answer is yes. Always yes. 6 months later. The Emily Thompson Foundation opened its doors on a bright April morning in downtown Washington, D.C. The space was filled with light, with mirrors, with soft floors where children could move safely. Music played softly through speakers. Parents arrived looking exhausted and hopeless, carrying children who moved in their own rhythms. Madison stood at the front of the room, wearing soft clothes that allowed her to move freely. Noah stood beside her, Sophie and Isabella at their side, wearing their purple tutus. "Welcome," Madison said to the gathered families. "You're not here to be fixed. You're here to be seen. To be met where you are. To remember that movement is language, and rhythm is love, and presence is the greatest gift we can give each other." The music started. Slowly, tentatively, the families began to move. A mother swayed with her son. A father lifted his daughter's arms gently, following her lead. A grandmother hummed while her grandson rocked beside her. Noah watched his daughters dance. Their movements weren't perfect, but they were theirs. They were alive. They were present. They were here. And so was he. Sophie looked up at him and reached for his hand. Together, they moved in slow circles, father and daughter, finally speaking the same language. Isabella joined them, then Madison, until all four of them were moving together in the center of the room, surrounded by other families learning to do the same. Emily had been right all along. The answer was never about fixing what was broken. It was about learning to dance with it. To move through the pain, through the grief, through the fear, together. And as Noah took his daughter's hands and spun them gently, their laughter filling the room, he finally understood what coming home really meant. Not returning to what was, but creating something new from what remained. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest miracle of all. Emily never got to see this. Never got to watch her daughters spin in their purple tutus, their faces bright with joy. Never got to meet Madison, the woman who would help her husband find his way back home. But somehow, in the video she left behind, in the love she planted like seeds, she was there. In every movement, every rhythm, every moment of grace. And that's the thing about love. It doesn't end when we do. It just finds new ways to dance. If this story meant something to you, if it changed something in the way you see second chances or healing or the people who save us, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that it's not too late. That they can come home. That love is still waiting. Subscribe if you believe that. Subscribe if you know that some stories are too important to let disappear into the algorithm. This is one of them.